Good evening. It's Saturday, the 15th of November. You're tuned in to our 6 p.m. newscast, coming to you from Arirang's news centre in Seoul. Thanks ever so much for tuning in. I'm Mark Broome. Our top story this evening, it's been an awfully long time in the works, but Korea has finally wrapped up negotiations with New Zealand over a free trade agreement. The deal marks the 14th FTA Korea has concluded and expands the country's already vast free trade network to Oceania. Hwang Ji-hye starts us off.
Korea and New Zealand have reached agreement on a free trade deal, wrapping up almost 5.5 years of negotiations. President Park Geun-hye and New Zealand Prime Minister Geun-hye made the announcement on Saturday in Australia as they met on the sidelines of the G20 Leaders Summit in Brisbane. New Zealand has agreed to immediately eliminate tariffs on washing machines and tires from Korea, while tariffs on products like refrigerators and auto parts will be gone within 3 years of the deal going into effect. Within 7 years, all tariffs on traded goods from Korea will also have been removed. The trade deal is expected to boost Korea's exports to New Zealand, a country that relies heavily on imports in terms of industrial goods. Bilateral trade volume between the two countries stood at $2.8 billion last year. Under its side of the deal, Korea has agreed to wipe out tariffs on more than 96% of goods like wine, lamb, and kiwi fruit within 20 years. The two sides excluded some sensitive fresh farm produce like rice, apples, and garlic from the agreement. Through the deal, Korea and New Zealand also aim to have more people-to-people exchanges. New Zealand is going to raise the maximum number of working holiday visas for young Koreans to 3,000 per year from the current 1,800. Koreans will also be allowed to stay for 6 months, up from the current 3-month period. The two countries plan to officially sign the deal early next year and for it to come into effect within 2015 after both countries' parliaments ratify it. Hwang Ji-hye, Arirang News.
Now, aside from pushing through that free trade agreement with New Zealand, President Park Geun-hye has been busy in Brisbane touting the success of her government's efforts to strip away cumbersome regulations that hinder growth. Our Chae-yu-san, who's travelling with the President, filed this report.
As each G20 member nation is set to present its own growth strategy in Brisbane this week, President Park shared her administration's deregulation efforts and experiences with world leaders on the first day of the summit, one part of her overall economic innovation plan. The Korean leader talked about a 7-hour ministerial meeting she held in March, during which officials, corporate leaders, and representatives of small and mid-sized businesses debated ways to get rid of regulations that are often outdated and unnecessary. Since then, more than 300 cases of regulatory reform, such as allowing SMEs to operate youth internship programs and simplifying the hiring of foreign workers, were either completed or are currently under parliamentary review. She also introduced her government's efforts to generate public consensus on regulatory reforms, such as setting up a web portal to provide related information and to handle reported cases of unhelpful regulations. And to keep the reform momentum going, President Park referred to a top-down regulation guillotine system of slashing large amounts of red tape at once, a policy first used by Sweden in the 1980s. The Korean government plans to remove 10% of such regulations this year and 20% by 2017. Chae-yu-san, Arirang News, Brisbane.
Now, North Korea has warned South Korea against firing warning shots across the border, saying such provocations could trigger a war. Reporting a statement from the Korean People's Army, the Korean Central News Agency said Saturday that patrolling the military demarcation line is Pyongyang's legitimate right. Earlier this week, South Korean troops fired 20 warning shots across its border with the north, following verbal warnings to North Korean soldiers in the restricted area. In a separate report, the North News Agency also said Seoul should stop activists flying anti-Pyongyang leaflets across the border. River crossing operations are among the most difficult and risky manoeuvres facing an armed force. To maintain readiness against any eventuality on the Korean peninsula, the South Korean military recently conducted a drill using floating tank transporters on a river in Korea's Gyeonggi-do province. Our Kim Yeon-bin was there and filed this report.
Tanks pushed forward into a river near enemy territory. Once on the other side, it secures the area for allies to land. Vessels are backing the forces by transporting key artillery and tanks. They are here to conduct river crossing exercises in Yeoju, Gyeonggi-do province. The exercise is part of the annual 2-week Hoguk defense drill that kicked off on Monday.
The Hoguk exercise prepares us for any types of enemy threat and aims to fully complete our military readiness.
Vessels are busy transporting pieces of the bridge, while troops are giving it their all, pulling and connecting the pieces together. Every minute is crucial during war, and a minute could determine the ultimate fate of the battle. In this operation, the Army can build a temporary 200-meter bridge in less than an hour. Once constructed, dozens of tanks and heavy artillery can cross this river in a matter of minutes. Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman Admiral Geun-hye was at the training ground, supervising the exercise. Che said with North Korea endlessly raising tensions along the military demarcation line and Northern Limit Line, troops needed to enhance their capabilities to promptly respond to any threat from the north. Kim Yeon-bin, Arirang News, Yeoju.
The European Union has reworked its proposal to impose a UN resolution on North Korea for its human rights abuses after Cuba made moves to try and get the original toned down. International news agency AFP reports the revised text includes a provision that welcomed Pyongyang's offer of cooperation with the UN Human Rights Commissioner and its invitation to visit the UN Special Rapporteur. It, however, still calls on the Security Council to consider referring the North Korean leadership to the International Criminal Court for crimes against humanity. The resolution will be voted upon in the so-called Third Committee on Tuesday before going to the full UN General Assembly in December. Now, US-based think tank, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, has removed from its website a video and graphics which described Korea's easternmost Dokdo Island as a disputed territory under a newly launched interactive website, the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative. The think tank had mentioned that Dokdo was an area contested by Korea and Japan. The now deleted information said that Seoul and Tokyo often traded remarks over Dokdo. Now, despite continued false territorial claims by Japan, the Korean government says that, from the perspective of history, geography and international law, Dokdo is 100% Korean territory. It's fairly common to see a lot of food poisoning cases during the hot summer months, but there's also another stomach virus that's active more during the cold season. It's the highly contagious norovirus. For more on how we can hopefully protect ourselves from this really rather nasty bug, our Son Jung-in reports.
While most of the bacteria that cause food poisoning lose strength in the cold winter weather, norovirus, also known as the winter vomiting bug, becomes more active since it can withstand sub-zero temperatures. According to data over the last 5 years, the number of norovirus cases increased sharply in winter, with the figure 2 to 3 times higher than summer and fall. The symptoms of norovirus infection usually include cramping, nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. The virus is highly contagious and can spread quickly from person to person in crowded, closed spaces, and as people tend to stay indoors during winter, there is a higher risk. You can catch it by sharing foods or using the same utensils as an infected person, or by touching contaminated surfaces and then putting your fingers in your mouth.
Unlike other food poison viruses, norovirus can only proliferate inside the body. People with the illness should not prepare food for others for at least 2 weeks because the virus can survive that long on surfaces.
There is no vaccine to prevent norovirus nor specific medication to treat people with it. Health experts advise boiling or frying vegetables and seafood if possible and rinsing raw food carefully in order to reduce the chance of infection. But most importantly, wash your hands carefully with soap and water, especially after using the bathroom or before eating or preparing food. 손정인, Arirang News.
Now, in international news, the United States is mobilizing more than 2,000 military personnel to help combat the Ebola outbreak in West Africa. The Pentagon says the new call-up will not increase the number of troops on the ground in Liberia and Senegal, but it will replace those already in those countries. There are currently 2,200 US personnel in West Africa, but that number will rise to nearly 3,000 over the next month or so. The troops are mainly tasked with building facilities and training healthcare workers in those countries. China also sent a 163-member team to Liberia on Friday to set up a hospital there. The Philae Comet Lander is now said to be asleep, unfortunately, after its batteries ran out. Scientists at the European Space Agency say all systems on board the device, which made scientific history this week, have gone into a kind of hibernation mode, as it has been unable to recharge as it lays under the shadow of a crater wall after a bumpy landing. However, the mission is still being hailed as a great success. The probe's team says 80% of the scientific information they had been hoping for has been relayed back to them. And that's not all. As the comet approaches the sun, scientists hope the brighter sunlight might just be enough to allow Philae to reboot and power back up. And before we go, leaving you with the weather for the remainder of the weekend. It's a very cold evening across the country, and we're going to see the mercury plunge to -1 degree Celsius tonight in Seoul. Tomorrow will bring a mix of sun and clouds, with temperatures maxing out in the upper single digits throughout much of the nation. And now, for our overseas viewers, let's take a look at the weather conditions in your part of the world. And that's all we have for now. Do enjoy the rest of your Saturday, wherever you are watching us, and stay tuned to Arirang. We'll be back with our next newscast at 10 p.m. Korea time. Until then, goodbye.